Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who somehow has never listened to an entire Paul Simon album start to finish. So this review of 7 Psalms is essentially my first Paul Simon album, despite the fact that the album itself feels like it's a conscious attempt to be his final album, with its meditations on death and God and love. But that's not to say that I haven't been exposed to Paul Simon. Paul Simon is just one of those artists, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s like I did, where he was sort of everywhere. But I never listened to his music, Of course I knew Sound of Silence, I knew a Bridge Over Troubled Waters, I knew a Mother and Child Reunion and Me and Julio in Schoolyard and all that kind of stuff. I always sort of suspected he might be Canadian. I don't think he is. But I've always respected him, It's not like Billy Joel or an artist like that where they're very popular. They're sort of a baby boomer musician who makes music that is appreciated by middle-aged people when you're younger, that you sort of have a hatred for. I sort of neither loved nor hated. I was just middle. He seemed like a funny guy, Whenever he would be making music videos, they'd often be funny. Whenever I'd see him on Saturday Night Live, he seemed funny. I appreciated the fact that he married Edie Brickell, even though she was a lot younger than him, but they're still married, 30 years later. So basically what happened was at a certain point, I realized Paul Simon was just not for me. And usually when people say that, they're being condescending, It's terrible, but you'd like it. That's not what I mean. I just mean there's something about his songwriting, something about the sweetness of his voice. Maybe it was his sincerity. Maybe I was too much of an edgelord, Maybe I needed something cool. And maybe that's my problem with Paul Simon, is if he is cool, he is cool in the way that he acknowledges that he is not cool. Where he's sort of not even trying to be cool. He's sort of post-cool. So who is he for? Well, in order to answer that question, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's important. And listen, this is a new music review show. I review new music. This is new music, but I usually review music for younger people. So not a lot of people are going to watch this video. That's okay. If you do like it, smash the like bucket. If you leave AVAA, awesome video as always, in the comments, I guarantee you I will give you a little heart. I read every comment, but I don't comment on them all. But I think I'm going to have an interesting meditation here, sort of on the relationship between Generation X and the baby boomers, which I think is often a generation divide, which can be seen through a complicated relationship to music. Most Generation Xers' favorite musicians are the Beatles, So this generation gap is very complex. And when I think about the older generation, I'm obviously thinking about fathers. My father died a couple months ago. I'm thinking about fathers all the time. My father was the first of all my friends' fathers to pass. So I've kind of had this very strange moment in my life where a lot of my friends are reaching out to me and sharing with me all the experiences they had with my dad. My dad had a lot of flaws, but he was definitely a cool guy. And he was very sociable with my friends, not with other people. But, he was sort of this cool guy. And I think there's this sort of thing where, and tell me if this is true for you. Seriously, tell me in the comments. Where each of my friends' fathers had, their music guy. Like, my friend Keith, his dad was Dylan guy, He was also friends with Grill Marcus, so he had pretty wild taste in music. But that was that. And my dad was the Frank Zappa guy. Loved Zappa. His grandkids call him Zappa, right? Or called him Zappa. So what does this have to do with Paul Simon? Well, whenever I think of Paul Simon, I instantly think of my friend Brad and his father. And my friend Brad's father is a very Paul Simon-esque figure in my life. Let me explain. He was not a particularly cool guy. It turns out he actually was, but he didn't seem cool. He wasn't an old hippie like my dad. He wouldn't run up to me and give me a hug like my dad would to Brad. He's had this sort of aloofness to it. He had some passions, which was cool. He loved British comedy. He loved the Celtics. He used to go take photographs of the Bill Russell era Celtics on the floor. Very cool. But his defining feature in my mind was his insane love of Paul Simon and Toyota Corollas. This is the kind of guy he was. he had like some kind of deal with a Toyota, or I mean the kind of guy he is, but I don't think he still has this deal with his Toyota dealership, where where he had like every 3 years he'd get a brand new Toyota Corolla, the exact same model. He had some kind of deal where it would be cheaper if he promised to get the same car every time. And he always had the tape of, what was it, Graceland or whatever the African, the second of the Paul Simon African albums, or the first, I don't know. One of those 80s albums that I never listened to, but I kind of respected for introducing African music to a larger audience. Brad's dad liked this album enough that he owned multiple copies of the same Paul Simon album in the same car. I don't know what he thought was going to happen. If someone was going to Fast Times at Ridgemont Hyatt and just steal the cassette, they need to have a backup. I don't know if he was afraid of the cassette breaking. I don't know if this was from a previous car. But this, to a certain extent, epitomized what Brad's dad was like. And I imagine you know people like this. Maybe your dad is this kind of person. And it was just kind of funny. It was this kind of funny thing. And like, I would sort of be laughing at him. While at the same time, my dad, for as cool as he was now, as much as he loved Zappa, he didn't really listen to music. He wasn't really into music when I was growing up. And I'm thinking about my friend's dad, and his name was Ralph, and I used to call him Ralphie T because that was kind of like a funny thing. Like, he's such a square guy that I wouldn't do this. But as time goes on, I realized that, like, Ralphie T is like my hero. And mind you, I do not know him very well, okay? I don't think we've ever had any real conversations together. But when I think about his life, the life that he modeled is actually the life that I want. Yeah, he was a normie who owned like 3 copies of the same Paul Simon album, but he took care of his kids. He had a great sense of humor. He ended up like serving on the school board. Like because he saw an issue with the education, so he served. Speaking of schools, he organized it so that he would help students from the city who were going to our suburban schools. Like, he would be a welcome family to make sure they were okay. He might not have been the hippie with the long hair and the cool and the peace now stuff, but he was actually living the ethos. He was trying to make the world a better place while taking care of the people around him. Like, he was the real spirit of the 60s, in a way. Exhibited in a sort of 80s, 90s button-down guy who goes to work as a consultant or something. I don't know. I worked for his company once, and I still didn't know what he did as a job. And I worked there, okay? So this all goes back to Paul Simon, this little story. And I'm sorry if you don't like this story, but I don't give numbers. Okay, I'm not going to tell you this is an A+ or a 7 out of 5. I'm just going to sort of try to tie these things together and realize Ralphie T was for lack of a better term, just a very good white person who was given the institutional power of whiteness, who was given advantages and privileges, and used that privilege to make a good life for him and his family, while also trying to serve his community and serve people who did not have those privileges. So the whole time that in my mind I was thinking of him as this not cool guy, and this is what you realize in middle age, most of the people who you think are really cool when you're 15 or 16, they're not cool. They're like burnouts, or they're like, oh man, he's the coolest guy. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have a job, but he volunteers at the improv shop twice a week. And like, that's what you think of as the cool guy in your life. So I've realized that at its worst, the type of person that my friend's dad was. And again, no one's perfect. Plenty of issues, obviously, with every parent-child relationship. But sort of at its worst, Paul Simon and his fans are a kind of NPR tote bag holding, smug head nod audience. Like, that's the part that drove me crazy. It's sort of like, And there's one moment on this album where it's sort of, and I want to just smack the NPR tote bag out of your hand. You tote bag and Totenberg out of here, okay? It's a deep cut for you NPR fans, okay? So that's at its worst. But at its best, and I think this applies to my friend's dad and to Paul Simon, it's a good person. A good person. You watch that Frank Zappa documentary, he was a great artist. an innovator, a crazy man. The modern day composer refuses to die. He also refuses to be an accountable parent. Okay? It's not great. Okay? You don't want Frank Zappa as your dad, I don't think. But you might want Paul Simon. So I think that's why Paul Simon wasn't for me, because I didn't understand that kind of cool. I didn't understand the responsibility, the insane adultness of Paul Simon, which makes me, in my middle age, even though I spend half my time listening to whatever, Kodak Black and all sorts of underground rap music, it makes me more able to appreciate it. Which brings us to this album, 7 Psalms, my first Paul Simon album. Paul Simon, The Good Boomer. Should that be the thumbnail? It might be. I do have one other boomer hero, but I'll talk about him at the end. So this album. Should I go back and listen to more Paul Simon? I think I probably should. This sounds like an insult, but this is like one of the most exceedingly listenable albums I have heard in a long time. Like I listened to it first, like I normally do, like in the gym, like with my headphones on, sort of listening carefully. But I also today, I was working on annual reports. That's why I'm in my office. I have a very pedestrian job as a French professor. Is great, but I'm also an administrator. But this album just has such a wonderful singular vibe with this acoustic guitar and voice. Thematically, it's very consistent. It's 7 Psalms, but at least on title, it's just one track. It's just one idea. And the way that it sounds, there's little variations. There's enough variation to the point where you never feel like it's one song, even if it's one track and one idea. Do you hear that difference? It's not one song over and over again. It's just one idea in 7 different variations that are just variant enough, along with a repeated sound that just really helps to tie the whole thing together. And what is that theme? Well, listen, this album's not for me. Okay? It's not for me. This album's for boomers. Okay? This is a boomer death album. That's a better title. Paul Simon's Boomer Death album. That'll probably be it. But there's a bunch of these, and there's going to be more. Hopefully, hopefully artists get a chance to say goodbye. John Lennon never got a chance to say goodbye. He never got, he never got to make his album about death. Bob Dylan did. In 2000. He's still cooking along. I don't know if he's ever going to release a second death album, but he released, I think, the essential boomer death album, Time Out of Mind, the same way he did the essential death album, the essential boomer album of almost every stage of life. But that's really what this album's about. It's about death, life, God, and sort of the works. It's sort of all of it all put together. But again, it's very tolerable. It's not particularly preachy. It's not lamenting. Sometimes when you listen to albums of this kind of spiritual nature, it can feel oppressive. It can feel sort of like why me? But the thing that has always I've always been vaguely aware of while ignoring Paul Simon is that he's a funny guy. And funny people talking about death, even if they're not trying to be funny, is a lot easier than very serious people talking about death. Because very serious people talking about death, that's serious on serious. The guitar is gorgeous, great guitar lines, and his voice is a spectacular combination of strong and vulnerable. I really should listen to more of Paul Simon, shouldn't I? Tell me in the comments, what should I listen to of Paul Simon? Understanding I don't like the Julio Schoolyard thing. That song, don't like that. And I don't like the Take the Bus Chuck and Take the Train Jane and Take the Scooter Magruder and Take the Segway Andre. That song, I don't like that song at all. So if I want to listen to Paul Simon while avoiding those songs, what do I listen to? Strong and vulnerable. But let's get to an example from the album. Let's get to the song The Lord. I had to pronounce that with a Boston accent. Click above the lights, which I cannot get to turn off. They are time sensitive. So at a certain point in this video, those lights will go off. When they do, smash the like bucket. Subscribe. So this is the leitmotif. This is the song that comes back. It's only a 30-minute album, but part of what makes it so listable is the fact that this leitmotif comes back. It starts off with the sound of bells. The bells remind me of sort of Buddhist prayer bells. Buddhism is a lot like Paul Simon. Like, I'm vaguely aware of some of its ideas, but I've never really studied it extensively, and I sort of associate it with people who have NPR tote bags, if that makes sense to you. Kind of a middle-aged folky thing. And then this is going to blow your mind. Okay, if you haven't listened to this album and you hadn't made this connection, I'm going to help you out here. It's an acoustic 12-string guitar with a super heavy riff. What? No, I turned on Do Not Disturb. I'm sorry. I got my computer over here for notes. It's a Led Zeppelin song. This is a The Lord is a Led Zeppelin song. I just waiting for Bonham to just hit the gong. And he had this great, like, playing behind this awesome Jimmy Page style guitar riff. I could imagine Robert Plant, the Lord, like singing up high. It's funny because, Led Zeppelin was Brad's favorite band. That was one of my favorite bands. So like that, like Led Zeppelin was the Brad band. So this is fun because I sort of imagine this being Paul Simon doing his best imitation of a Led Zeppelin song. That's going to piss off everybody. But now that I've said it, listen to the Lord. It is just a Led Zeppelin song. Of course, the lyrics are not goofy as hell and slightly misogynist and stolen from a blues artist who's been dead for 20 years. It's a sort of metaphysical consideration. I like this album because it doesn't rely too much on sort of parallels between the natural and metaphysical. It makes it explicit quite often. But this opening here, I've been thinking about the Great Migration. Noon and night, they leave the flock, and I imagine their destination, meadow grass, jagged rock. Hey, it went off. So, he's talking about the Great Migration. I assume this is death. I assume this is talking about arriving at the destination of the afterlife, which is depicted as meadow grass and jagged rock. The Lord is my engineer. So the Lord is going to be a lot of things in this album. The first thing he is, or it is, she is, whatever you want to think the Lord is, they is an engineer. Lord is the earth I ride on. Lord is the face in the atmosphere, the path I slip and slide on. So the Lord exists in the theology. Someone's in my hallway. It's Wednesday afternoon. School is out of session. That's the Lord. The Lord. The Lord turned on the light behind me. Stupid Lord. The Lord is very well depicted here and described because it is so many things. Like to be a path that you slide on and to be the face and the earth and the engineer, the Lord is simultaneously a passive force and an active force in his life, which creates a sort of vagueness, which I think you need if you're trying to describe an almighty creator. Then there's another riff, and then this sort of true-lulu-lulu-lulu, a thing that he says. I don't know if he's trying to say true like truth, or if he's just saying silly words, or if this is just a placeholder until Robert Plant comes on and goes, true-lulu-lulu. Then there's like a little breakdown, and like the bells come back, again, more of this Buddhist prayer style, slight modulation, crystal comet, starlit night. There's a whole theme of life being like a comet, wandering like a migrant, and then get back to the main riff, and the endless river flows, another true lulu, and then we get back to this gentle part. So it goes back and forth. It's funny because when I say it goes back to a gentle part, it's not like it's ever rockin', but there are gentler parts where the guitar is slightly higher. Tears and flowers dry over time. That's my favorite lyric on this album. Tears and flowers dry over time. So whenever people talk about tears, one second. I'm here in my office. One second. I'll show you. Looking for it here. Where is it? Damn it. Well, anyways, I did have a book up here. Oh yeah, it's going to be over here. What? No, that's not it. Well, I can't find it anymore. It should be up here. Well, anyways, when we talk about... That's fine. So in here, in a great compilation of 16th century French poetry, there's a big theme, especially about Ronsard, who was this sort of like the king of the poets in Renaissance France. Oh my God. Sorry, I found a weird piece of paper from a failed romantic relationship. Here. How'd that get there? Don't know. So the idea of flowers over time, this is often used in poetry for the Carpe Diem theme of, that flowers are beautiful, but they only exist for a short period of time, so you need to seize on them. It's often a way to try to seduce women when they're young, trying to say you're going to be old eventually. But the theme of flowers representing death is pretty consistent. But then pairing it with tears is great, because tears also dry, and that's a very vital thing. That's implying that both sadness and life will end. So it's a very hopeful and realistically deterministic interpretation of existence. It's a good lyric. Where is my copy of Ronsard? Oh well. Maybe it's back at home. Nothing dies of too much love. It's a good line. It sort of ties me together with the flowers, because flowers can die from too much water. And I often think about how terrible that is. The flowers need water, but they can die from too much water. And nothing dies of too much love is my second favorite lyric on the album. The Lord is a virgin forest, the Lord is a forest ranger. So again, it's the passive thing. It is just the forest, but it is also the thing that is responsible for caring for the forest. So it is an active and a passive Lord all at the same time. There's sort of a jazzy chorus, and the song seems to end, but then we get another Zeppelin-style riff, and we get to the ending, which turns dark. This is the other side of the Lord, the avenging Lord. The COVID virus is the Lord is the ocean rising. This is weird. There's maybe a centrist element to Paul Simon, which makes sense. Centrists are not cool. Except for me. Centrists are not cool. So, saying the Lord is the ocean rising almost sounds like it's forgiving human-created climate change. Or maybe not. I don't know. The Lord is a terrible swift sword, a simple truth surviving. So here, all of existence is just boiled down, and when you see the Lord in this light, in this kind of darker light, the only thing that matters is survival. A weird vocoder sound at the very, very end, which is nice. I'm not going to go through the rest of the album. I'm not going to go through the album a lot quicker. Not so quick that I don't pronounce the word going to properly. The next track is called Love is Like a Braid. More just guitar and voice. This is that sort of wry smile. Like Paul Simon has this way of singing where you feel like he's just sort of like, Love is like a braid, some say, and I don't disbelieve it. The wry smile comes from the way he's phrasing it. I don't disbelieve it. So disbelief is a negative, and so he's doing a double negative, which implies tepid appreciation of this idea. So he doesn't believe that love is like a braid, but he doesn't disbelieve love is like a braid. Very poetic here, so many chords, very nice. This even reminds me a little bit of Harry Nilsson. I think that's another good example of a sort of soft rock guy that cool people like and uncool people don't, but in reality isn't that far away from the uncool people. My Professional Opinion is the worst track on the album, and that is my professional opinion as a French professor who has a hobby that he picked up in the lobby of music reviewing. This is pure tote bag rock. This is an old person who has been told how social media works and how the internet works, and is weighing in, describing how the discourse has become so polluted. Good morning, Mr. Indignation. Oh. God, dude, come on, Paul Simon. Good morning, Mr. Indignation. You just wrote about tears and flowers drying, and now you're writing about Mr. Indignation. You smug, head-nodding. I heard two cows in a conversation. One called the other one a name. In my professional opinion, all the cows in the county must bear the blame. What a measured take, that the one cow who denies other people's existence is calling the other cow who's defending people's existence a name. And they're all the same, They're all the same. They're just the same. We're all just in the big middle right here. We don't need to protect ourselves. We don't need to protect those who are in danger because we're all just the same, just the online discourse. So anyways, I'm not a big fan of this song, but that's okay. Cool bit with the mouse harp, some cymbals. cool variation in the middle of the album. This made me realize something, this song, because it reminds me a little bit of some of Andrew Bird's more recent music about this same kind of divide. My Finest Work Yet is one of my favorite albums I've ever reviewed. Seriously, top 10 albums I've ever reviewed. But realistically, it's mostly in this vein of sort of like a privileged white guy commenting on the sort of ridiculousness of the extremes at both sides. It made me realize that Andrew Bird is maybe the new Paul Simon. What do you think? Good idea, right? Almost a guitar solo here, but not. Then gets back to the Led Zeppelin song, The Lord. The Lord? The Lord is the face of the atmosphere, and back to the COVID idea. And then we get to Your Forgiveness. And again, this is the end-of-life style song here. Odd. By the way, this album was released as a surprise, right? I didn't know it was coming out. Is he sick? I don't know. I don't know. I hope not. I hope not. You know? But it wouldn't surprise me if he knew that his time was limited, not in a general sense, like Bob Dylan did, but in a specific sense, like Warren Zevon. You know, Warren Zevon released a Death album when he was dying of cancer, and I bought it. You want to know how many times I've listened to it? 20 seconds of the first song. And it made me too sad, and I turned it off. I love Warren Zevon. I will never listen to that album. But a similar way that the David Bowie's last album. So I don't know. But this seems to be, you know, great odd sounds, almost like accordion in the back and some flute. I thought initially the song was filler, but as I listened to it more, I came to really love it, especially the way the melody is sung on just the word, Your Forgiveness. It seems to be that this is about him confronting going to heaven or hell or heaven's gates. I, the last in line, hoping the gates won't be closed before your forgiveness. Then there's kind of a beat change and singing about all of life's abundance in a drop of condensation, dip your hand in heaven's water. There's a thing where, like, what's the deal with, like, old men in water? Have you noticed that? The older I get, the more I start to wax philosophical about water. You know, my dad was obsessed with rocks with holes in them because it was a sign that water's more powerful than rock. My sister-in-law's dad, every time he'd wash his hands, would say, water, the universal solvent. This does feel like it's that kind of meditation on just the, you know, just like the amount that, like, water is such a spectacular, amazing thing. And that it is sort of all of heaven and existence can be contained in the power of water, you know? It's happening to me. I tell you, you hit 40 years old, two things happen. You get fascinated by water, and you can tolerate Steely Dan. I have my reasons to doubt. That's a very important aspect of this album, him bringing in his doubt, because the doubt has to be part of it as well. He has to, when confronting death, and it doesn't matter if you're young or old, whenever you think about death, you doubt whatever it is you think. Whatever it is you think, you doubt it. The most certain person on earth, whether you are certain there is an afterlife or not an afterlife, there is that doubt. Next song is called Trail of Volcanoes. It's a song about, like, King Kong living on Monster Island, and he has to fight against sort of all these other monsters until finally he takes the rival, which is this weird kind of like lizard thing. It's not Godzilla, but it looks like Godzilla, and then throws it into a volcano and it blows up. The next song, I'm sorry. That was an improvised joke. That's not what Trail of Volcanoes is about. Trail of Volcanoes is about an awesome, like, rad percussion, like bell and drums. Like, where did this come from? This is that variation I'm talking about. I sort of wish there would be a version of the song without guitar, just to hear it, because this is sort of like the coolest part of the album, like in that other sense of cool. Some more accordions in the back. This appears, and I'm glad that he didn't do this much, to be talking about his youth. The worst part about albums by people who are confronting old age is when they wax overly poetic about their youth. Because even if they're trying as hard as they can, elements of nostalgia creep their way in. And as you know, nostalgia is the father of fascism, so we need to be careful of nostalgia. A father of fascism. But what I like now is just the image of volcanoes, the image of things being done. And then he ends with this line, the pity is the damage that's done leaves so little time for amends. And this is where you wonder, is he talking about himself personally? Is he talking about life itself? Almost like monk sounds at the end, and then distortion. The Sacred Harp is the hardest song for me to place. I don't understand the song. It's a story of hitchhikers and the man doesn't speak and the woman does, and Edie Brickell, Paul Simon's wife, like sort of does the voice, and it's sort of about like spirituality and hitchhiking and life's road, but I don't have an easy answer for this. Some accordion, no harp. I wish there was a harp on here. I do like hearing Edie Brickell's voice. I bought the Edie Brickell album when it came out. You know, with that, what was that song? Because what I am is what you are is what. Such 90s lyrics. Like, hey, what did you say? Nothing. What I am is what I am, and what you are is what. Oh man, that was a preachy song. But it was a good album, Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians. Not like great, but good. That's right, people. I've listened to more Edie Brickell than I have Paul Simon. W, feminist. The ringing strings, the thought that God turns music into bliss. We left the pickup in the driveway. The moon appeared as amber in the mist. So this appears to be a sort of section of the album where he's thinking about music and creation and art and his relationship to music, because the Lord motif comes back, and the Lord is a puff of smoke and a personal joke. But then it becomes like his engineer, his record producer, and it's clear that while he's in this meditation on his own life and existence and nature, he's also now bringing in his creations and art and the relationship between the divine and the creative, which of course... Well, not of course, but I personally believe in God, and part of the reason I believe in God is because music exists and because it's so good. And I'm sorry if you don't like that. You can also think that the reason that you love music is because of the little electrons in your brain that go firing off synapses. It's cool. It's all part of the same cosmic gumbo. And then the album ends with Wait, and this is the most clear. Oh my God, I'm dying, I don't want to die. Guitar and blooping sounds. Some bells here, but they're not like the prayer bells. They're kind of more in tune than an actual instrument. They're not, what's that term for random that's more fancy? Au hasard in French, but aleatory. They're not random the way they're played. They're in rhythm. Great descending chords, and this is where his singing gets the most impassioned. Like the way he sings the word wait, and I assume he's talking to death, he's talking to God. Wait, don't take me yet. He just holds, and this is that strength and that vulnerability I was talking about. Wait, I'm not ready, I'm just packing up my gear. Wait, my hand's steady, my mind's still clear. Long held world of wait. So, this is the idea that he's not ready to die because he's still in good physical shape. He's still fine. He can't possibly die. I'm not ready. And then what's interesting is Edie Brickell pops in on here as well. And in the back half of the album, song, it gets a little bit busier, more kind of faraway cymbals. And after Edie Brickell comes in, and then he has this beautiful line, I want to believe in a dreamless transition. That's great. That's what I'd like to believe in too. That's... If I could believe what I want to believe, and you can't believe what you want to believe, you just believe what you believe. But if I could choose my belief, I would believe in a dreamless transition into death, into some kind of great afterlife. But then, like, the woman, Edie Brickell, comes back, and it seems as though he's implying that she is his beautiful mystery guide. Now, maybe she's not. Maybe the beautiful mystery guide is God. Maybe the beautiful mystery guide is music. Maybe the beautiful mystery guide is life. Maybe the beautiful mystery guide is sort of all these things in one. But the end feeling is that when Edie Brickell comes on here and says, with the last words of the album, life is a meteor, let your eyes roam, heaven is beautiful, it's almost like home, children get ready, it's time to come home, and then they both say together, amen. It seems that maybe, and this is emphasized by the album cover being two owls, not just one owl, but two owls together, that maybe this is also about this concept of love, and that the only real heaven that there exists is love on earth. And life goes by quickly, so just appreciate nature, appreciate heaven, appreciate music, and appreciate the person you love. And you know what? That's not cool. It's not. It's much cooler to be edgy and dark and full of burning and passion and self-destruction. But that's not where Paul Simon is. Oh yeah, my own boomer hero is Neil Young. So I developed a love of Neil Young. I think it's a thing that people do where they relate to people of their parents' generation that sort of fulfill what they sort of wish that their parents would be. That's just a theory. I'm just throwing that theory out at you. 7 out of 5, I give this album. There you go. Did you listen to this album? What do I do about my new appreciation of Paul Simon? I'll go to the Record Archive in Rochester, New York, and I'll my favorite record store, and I'll look and see if they have any like used vinyl. Should I get one or the other? A friend of mine's last name was Waters, and we had a gym teacher, Mr. Arrangio. Weird little sadist. Like all gym teachers. Not all gym teachers. All the gym teachers I've had. Hashtag not all gym teachers. Hashtag every gym teacher Professor Skye ever had. And he would call everyone by a nickname. Like he called me Harvard because he saw me in Harvard Square once. So he called me Harvard. Not because of my grades. My grades were terrible in high school. But he referred to my friend whose last name was Waters as Bridge Over, because it was bridge over troubled waters. That's the thing about growing up in Boston. Even the bullies are smart and funny. Bridge over. Do a lap. Bridge over. All right. Until next time, there's the camera.